Welcome, everybody. We appreciate having you here for our final session of the BioUtah track. DoD, your partner in funding and innovation. I know some of you may think that's counterintuitive, but actually, you're going to learn about that today. I'm Kelvin Cullimore, President and CEO of BioUtah, and in just a minute, I'll introduce our panel moderator who will kick off the discussion. But before I do, shout out to our title sponsor, Renalytics, our track sponsor, Stoll Reeves. We're grateful for both of them and for all of our sponsors for that matter, because we couldn't do this conference without them. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Liz Powell. Liz is founder and president of Government to Growth, or G2G Consulting for short. G2G is a premier consulting firm in Washington, D.C. that specializes in identifying non-dilutive federal government funding. Liz has over 2 decades of experience working on health, defense, high-tech, and economic development issues in Congress, and as an attorney and lobbyist. She started G2G in 2007 and has been helping to connect life science companies with government funding ever since. Actually, BioUtah has contracted with G2G to provide BioUtah members with access to a monthly report and monthly webinars on federal government funding for the life sciences. It's a thorough and extensive report worth reviewing. We want to help connect our community with federal funding sources. There are numerous agencies looking for life science companies that fit their research priorities. So today we've asked Liz to moderate a session with Department of Defense officials that focus on funding medical innovations for the department. So Liz, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Kelvin, and so excited to be part of today's summit. I'm very impressed, amazing speakers so far. And today our 2 doctors are going to keep up with those amazing speakers. We've got Dr. Amber Mallory, the Director of Trauma and Clinical Care Research at Air Force 59th Medical Wing, and Dr. Diana Delmonico, Senior Scientist for Trauma and Clinical Care Research at the 59th Medical Wing. They are both civilian scientists, incredibly brilliant, dedicated, hardworking individuals. And I have had the pleasure of working with them for more than 5 years now. They are true experts at advancing science through collaborations with industry to meet warfighter needs. Today, they are going to share a fascinating perspective on DoD's interest in bioscience companies and how to work with the DoD to advance your technology. Doctors Mallory and Delmonico work with industry partners on joint research projects on a regular basis, and Dr. Mallory oversees non-dilutive funding streams for collaborative projects. They are always looking for companies and innovations to help warfighters, so they're really excited to connect with BioUtah and BioUtah members. And so we're really looking forward to today's discussion. I also wanted to call out my awesome colleague, Greg Kapkar. He and I team up together to do a lot of this bioscience non-dilutive funding work. And he is going to be the master of the slides, working to make sure that we have a nice, smooth presentation. So with that, would love to have Dr. Mallory start things off with her background and then get into the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. We're really excited to be part of such a prestigious conference. Just a quick minute about myself. Prior to being the Director of Trauma and Clinical Care for the 59th, I was the Director of Combat Casualty Care and Operational Medicine for the Naval Medical Research Unit in San Antonio. And prior to that, I was a FDA Fellow for the Cdmrp group. So I'll get right into it. Next slide, please. I have to give a general disclaimer since I am a federal employee. The opinions expressed here are mine and mine only and do not reflect the views of the U.S. Air Force, DoD, or the government. Next slide. We're going to do a quick overview of requirements-driven research as a DoD employee and a scientist. We're going to talk about requirements-driven research and how to get some of that funding to meet DoD medical needs. The 59th Medical Wing has moved under the Defense Health Agency. We were formerly associated with the Air Force Medical Support Agency, but now we are embedded with the Defense Health Agency. So I just want to give a quick overview of what that is and where it falls in the structure. The Defense Health Agency falls under the Military Health System as a component of the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. Our kind of component that we work for is J9, which is the Research and Development Directorate, and their function is to be an enabler for innovative improvements in patient outcomes and delivery of care for both active duty members and the beneficiary population. On the right there is the website for the Defense Health Agency. And so if you would like to visit that, and on the bottom schematic is there are 4 pillars, which are great outcomes, research to become a ready medical force, satisfied patients, that goes along with that beneficiary population, and then a fulfilled staff. Next slide. Thank you. And so I want to get a little bit more into the requirements-driven research component. We get our objectives from the National Defense Strategy, and then we develop what are called capabilities documents. There's an example of the title page of the Combat Casualty Care Support for Future Operations. Within that document, there is outlined gaps and medical research needs to support active duty members. We take those and they are developed into clinical research projects that are invested in, and those are provided through that strategic direction into these mission gaps and requirements. But the end goal is to build a more lethal joint force and improve readiness, strengthen alliances and attract new partners like you. That's why you're here and why we're here, and to reform the department for greater performance and affordability. On the bottom left, you'll see top 10 current battlefield issues. As the Trauma Clinical Care Research Director, these are some of the topic areas that we're really focused on closing gaps for and looking for medical innovation and knowledge solutions. Next slide. And here's how the research-driven requirements and funding really flows. It's just a broad overview, and you may have been having this covered in previous talks today. But Congress adds funds to the budget and it provides targeted guidance. They tell us what we're going to research. The Department of Defense oversees that program management, and then the contracting actions associated with it. Consumers demonstrate the need, and then they participate at all levels. So they give feedback or conduct research as well. We partner very well with other federal agencies, as you imagine, like FDA and CDC, specifically related to COVID, but for other research needs as well. And then really we connect with researchers and focus on those innovation gaps, really look at risk benefits and providing data and material that can be applicable in that forward setting or for military needs as a whole. Next slide. I really want to share with you kind of that playbook. And so here's a list of some of those topic areas that we're looking for innovation in. Prolonged field care is a major issue. We're expecting that near-peer adversary. And so we're really looking at how can we sustain people and get them stabilized for up to 72 hours before they are able to be moved to a more stable and medical location with more defined medical care. A big component of our research is hemorrhage and resuscitation support. We're always interested also in artificial intelligence. There's a big movement for autonomy, autonomous evacuation, automated machinery, things to that could be manpower multipliers, modernization, medical simulation and training. So how do we keep those folks ready to go? If there's not an active conflict, then we need to make sure their skills are sustained. And so we do a decent amount of research in how people learn and training modalities. Big data, how can those data be used to predict how people learn and outcomes? A lot of research in TBI, as you would imagine, PTSD and resilience, and then improving human performance. So things like biosensors for physiological monitoring, decision-making, how does sleep deprivation impact your performance? So these are just a teaser of that's okay. Yeah, you can go on to the next slide. That's just a teaser of some of the technologies and modernization strategies that we're looking to fulfill. So now I want to give you an overview of my specific office. So if you can go to that next slide. And what we can offer if you're interested in partnering with us. So we do execute and conduct research on behalf of the DoD. And so when applying for DoD funding, it is usually a good idea to have a DoD lab or end user involved. And so that's what we could provide for you is connections to labs to test your device or test your product, and then also give feedback on, is it militarily relevant? 59th Medical Wing is located in San Antonio, Texas on Lackland Air Force Base. Here's a list of kind of things that are happening in San Antonio for those of you that might not be familiar with the research landscape here, but there are also 2 joint labs, ISR, which is the Army Lab for Combat Casualty Care. Institute of Surgical Research is what the ISR stands for, and then the Naval Medical Research Unit San Antonio, which is a Navy combat casualty care, and they focus more on their service-specific requirements, but we come together to really solve joint problems. That makes us a significant medical innovation, research, and education and training hub. And we work at Brooke Army Medical Center. So if you hear me say BAMC, that is Brooke Army Medical Center. It's the only DoD level 1 trauma center. And then we also have Warfoot Hall Ambulatory Surgical Center, which is the DoD's largest outpatient clinic. And so that's important for clinical studies of active duty and both beneficiary populations. Next slide. So my specific office falls under the wing, as I mentioned, and we're the Office of Science and Technology. We grow medical leaders and we drive innovation in patient care and readiness. We conduct our own clinical studies as well as translational research to apply that knowledge gain to enhance performance, protect the force, advance medical care and capabilities across the global health system. On the right, you see kind of our pillars. I'm not going to read those, but that's how we function and our goals. And one of those big ones is foster collaboration. And I'm going to keep highlighting that. So hopefully we can partner together. Next slide. Here's one of our big focuses is also this trusted care and being a high reliability organization. Our clinical investigation program really plows through 400 protocols per year. We also focus in our major hub for readiness training and regulatory oversight. So you'll hear more about our regulatory functions, as well as our assistance for people that are getting funding through the DoD and some of the regulatory hurdles they might face. We have 2 accredited programs, one in animal care and use, the other for human research protections. And then we have major focus areas down there that are listed, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in detail in just a second. Next slide. So here are some of the capabilities within my office. I am one half of the research directorate. So as I mentioned, I'm the director for trauma clinical care, but on the other side, we have the joint integrative clinical medicine. So if you're not really, if your devices or technology isn't really geared toward combat casualty care, that's okay. We have a whole nother area that I think we would be able to partner you with, and we can connect you with other researchers and the director on that side too. As I mentioned, we have clinical investigations and research support. That's where we conduct most of our research. We have a nursing research center, a center for clinical inquiry. There's a dental focus as well. So if those there are stakeholders that want to get involved with dental research, we have active duty members that conduct research, but are also clinicians. I'll talk more about the other ones, but right there at the bottom is the Joint Integrative Clinical Medicine, and they have their own center for molecular detection to include pathogen detection and analysis, precision medicine, and that type of research. Next slide. Okay, so now I want to focus a little bit more on my area and my group's team or my team's efforts, and it's really on that future conflict. So as I mentioned, we're kind of transitioning away from Middle Eastern conflict and more into potentially dense urban environments. So they're called DUEs, D-U-E. And so this is just a schematic of that red zone where you would be looking at role 1, role 2, and role 3 of care. And I have a little chart for you. You don't have to remember all that, but to kind of help focus your ideas as to military relevant applications. Next slide. And so my portfolio shifts really on point of injury. So that would be very, very far forward where your first responders are paramedics or medical technicians or PJs and the Air Force side. And how do we stabilize and save a life immediately? And then a role 2 or a more specialized team would be getting them immediately out of the harm's way. And that might be a rotary evac or these small specialized scoop and run teams where it's like a team of three people, a surgeon, a technician, and a nurse. And then we try to get them to a role 3, which would be the delayed evacuation situation I was talking about, a field hospital, and how can we care for those patients, but also triage and provide the best chance for recovery and survival. So we're going to focus on that right half of this kind of continuum of care. Again, if you're more in a more beneficiary or fixed medical treatment facility, then that's something that we can also talk about with and hook you up with people that research those topics on the other side. Next slide. This is just for your reference, but this is those echelons of care, rule 1, 2, 3 that I mentioned. So that's for your reference. Next slide. And then the JAM Joint Austere Medicine portfolio is arranged into 5 programs here. As I mentioned, they're kind of color coded as it pertains to their role of care. So I'm just going to give an example of one of these programs for the sake of time. But one thing I want to really highlight is if you look at the medical director, they're all active duty. Some are Army, some are Air Force, but they're all active duty end users and clinicians. And this is a very big key because we need your research and your innovation to really be applicable. And we bring in those active duty members to assist with that and help us prioritize what research projects would really be solutions for the future warfighter. Next slide. I said I was going to only highlight one program. I'm going to highlight the CREST program, which is Clinical Resuscitation, Emergency Science, Triage, and Toxicology. Lieutenant Colonel Joe Madry is the director for this. He's an emergency medicine physician as well as a toxicologist. And this is kind of looking at that far forward role 1/2 care, echelon of care. And one project here that I really want to highlight is our participation in a joint collaboration looking at bacterial enzymatic removal of A antigen off of blood. And so that is moving toward having more universal whole blood for hemorrhagic control and resuscitation strategies. We also do other projects here focusing on portable ultrasound to detect non-compressible torso hemorrhage, as well as antidote testing for cyanide poisoning as an example. Next slide. One thing that I want to shift to now is an example of a successful military industry partnership. I'm focusing on a company that I personally was a principal investigator on, but the company is Next Science, and they were developing antimicrobial coatings for surfaces, medical devices, and things like that. And they have a product line that is actually antimicrobials for GI irrigants in surgery. And so we were discussing, can that particular irrigant be used as an antimicrobial to disinfect surgical tools in an austere environment? And so, as I mentioned, when you're in a hostile environment and you don't necessarily have time to autoclave and sterilize tools, you just need to clean them off. What is good enough? And so we looked at this particular product line as a potential alternative to decontaminate surgical tools. And we applied for a grant. We got $700,000 together with this company, developed a CRADA, and basically assessed the effectiveness of these products as antimicrobials. And there's just an example of the data. I'm not going to go through it, but I'm happy to discuss that further. But this is just the point of this slide, is to say, this is something we do very frequently, something that we're very successful at. And the deliverables for that are an updated clinical practice guideline, or CPG, and a manuscript. And then it's led to another partnership for a different product that we're going to investigate for biofilm mitigation on implant devices. Next slide. And so here, this is an example of just some, and this is a little bit outdated, it's from 2018, but some of the partnerships that our office has developed outside of San Antonio area, and then the worth of that. So the whole idea is to leverage each other's expertise to save money, but also expand your research and development repertoire, and then to actually get us the deliverables and the devices that we need for the active duty members. Next slide. So my goal here, and the reason that I thought it would be helpful and advantageous for us to present, is to really expand our communications and hopefully help you guys understand what we need. And so we're really in search of game changers for our military aspect. Here we have modernization, prolonged care, sensors, devices, ECLS, our extracorporeal life support. Those are all those topic areas that I kind of presented earlier. Next slide. And we want those to be for you to consider. These are key words. These are things that the military needs in order for them to be successful in implementation of these devices. And so I'm here. Is it portable? Can we move it really quickly from A to B? Is it lightweight? Again, they pack so much stuff into these far forward environments. We really need to lighten the load. Is it universally compatible? The last thing we want is a plug that doesn't work. Manpower multiplier is a huge factor. Can we take away from one person and put that load on the equipment? Is it sturdy? Is it going to get dropped? It's going to be needs to be ruggedized. It's dirty, it's dusty, it's cold, all of that. How does it perform in those situations? So these are all key aspects and things that we want the designers and the innovators to think of when they're developing their technologies. Next slide. And so now I'm going to partner up with my senior scientist here, Dr. Delmonico, and she's going to present to you how you get funding and how we can work together. So thank you for the time, and passing it to Dr. Delmonico.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this late afternoon. I am going to be going over partnership mechanisms as funding opportunities. I'm Diana Delmonico. I'm the senior scientist for trauma and clinical care at the 59th Medical Wing. My background is in epidemiology, neuroscience, and wound care specifically. And I also help out with the trauma and clinical care research directorate. I'm Dr. Mallory's senior scientist. So moving right along, next slide. Okay, so right now we're going to be discussing partnership mechanisms and funding opportunities. We're going to go through what our ORDA team is, and we're also going to talk about extramural grant submissions, which include the Cdmrp and other funding sources for you. Next slide. All right, so working with the DoD and with any DoD entity can be rewarding and complex. The 59th ST office receives requests for collaboration from a variety of small and large external entities who want to be game changers. And they bring something unique and effective to the battlefield. Our directors and our senior scientists look at these technologies that are submitted and determine the utility both for use on and off the battlefield, whether similar products are existent, and what gaps the candidate technology or knowledge deliverable is going to address. We have promising products, and they're assessed for additional collaboration opportunities that would synergize with other DoD labs. So what that means is if there's a blood product, for example, we offer to connect the external entity with the right or additional DoD partner to decrease the duplicity and leverage valuable resources within DoD. The last thing we want is to repeat something that somebody else is already doing. At the 59th, we divide those products that address gaps in the austere directorate or the clinical medicine directorate, which Dr. Mallory just went through. We also look at potential funding calls that may be on the horizon that would benefit for a joint collaboration and submission. Our office has their own technology transfer team, which is known as the ORDA team, who assist with agreements and technology assessments to determine appropriate paths needed for advanced development or certain products to get them across that finish line. We often call this avoiding the valley of death, which I'm sure many of you know, and we'll go into it in just a few moments. We ensure that these products obtain the right regulatory approvals or like FDA approval and things like that. A key takeaway is that the 59th is always interested in products that not only have military relevance, but can benefit the civilian sector as well. We don't want you to create something just for us. We want you to create something that is going to be universal. And yes, there will be a military component, and some of these things are going to be specialized, but it should look at the civilian sector as well. In the next slides, I'm going to be describing our ORDA team and the DoD funding sources more in depth. So let's get moving on. All right. The Tech Transition and Transfer Office, they handle a lot of different agreements. They oversee patenting and licensing processes within the 59th and their external collaborators. Dr. Scott Walter and his team offer the directors and the senior scientists an avenue for reviewing these products that may help close certain military relevant gaps and align with our mission. A specific area of interest for funding is AFWorks. This is an entity that offers CBR and STTR efforts by providing incremental funding to small businesses that can help transition technology. This is a timed process, though, just like with DHA's SBIR process. And so I encourage everyone to look at their website. I have put it on this slide for you. So how does it work? So basically, they collect proposals from small businesses and universities on technologies they are developing or wish to develop. They then identify proposals that align with end user requirements and research portfolios to share with ST leadership. Then, of course, we initiate contact with between the researchers and small businesses to facilitate this collaboration. We write and we route memos of support for signature to support selected proposals and developers. And this would be in your phase 1 and phase 2 processes. So Dr. Walter and his team will then track and report on CBR projects that the 59th office is sponsoring. Dr. Walter and his team also engage with the city's economic development community that includes academic and nonprofit agencies to ensure smaller companies have an opportunity and the mentorship needed so that they can work directly with us. Next slide. So I'm sure everyone is aware of the Valley of Death. And this slide is just basically going over what things need to happen so that you can cross the Valley of Death successfully. And so basically it is knowing the intellectual property ownership status, the before, the current, and the after. We need to develop a sound regulatory plan. We need to talk to the FDA sooner rather than later. A lot of people tend to avoid that. And that's not what we need to do. We need to start off with a very sound plan so that you can move through the FDA process quicker. We also need to think about your human subject recruitment plan. And this is important because oftentimes you say, I'm just going to collect all these people are going to volunteer, and human subject recruitment is complicated in and of itself. So we need an actionable recruitment plan. And these are all things that we talk about during our collaboration meetings. We need to ensure that the research is rigorous and reproducible. Basically, you want a well-developed experimental design. We need to know what it is that you want to do and how you want to do it. And then, of course, we'll look at the sample size to support statistical analyses or not. So moving right along. Okay. So this is just a quick slide. Again, just going through the ORDA office and what kind of agreements they do. This will help define those particular agreements so that you know exactly what it is you need to ask for. Next slide. Okay. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but this is an important slide because most proposal calls for the DoD require assignment of readiness levels to your product or knowledge build. But what is that and how do you assess that? These assessments are extremely important because specific TRL, which are technology readiness levels, or KRL, which is knowledge readiness levels, will define the type of funding your project may qualify to receive. The DoD, for example, has specific types of money assignments for science and technology. Basic research, TRL1, receives 6.1 basic funds. And so on and so forth. You get your TRL 2 to 4 is 6.2 funds. And then, of course, TRL 4 to 6 would be 6.3 funds. Our office primarily works with 6.1 to 6.4 funds. Next slide. So there are numerous types of award mechanisms tailored to the particular goals of a program, and these change from year to year. Release of the funding opportunities are typically announced via the Cdmrp website, as well as listserv email notifications. You can also find our funding opportunities posted on the Electronic Biomedical Research Application Portal, or EBRAP, government grants.gov, and in some cases, fedbizops.gov. Next slide. Okay. Although we work with many of the JPCs, our directorate, the Joint Austere Medicine for the 59th, primarily focuses research efforts under the JPC6 Combat Casualty Care. JPC6 seeks to drive medical innovation through the development of knowledge and material solutions for the acute and early management of combat-related trauma, including, but not limited to, this point of injury case and the en route and facility-based care. Studies funded under JPC6 strive to optimize survival and recovery from combat-related injury by targeting the following areas: You have your hemorrhage control and resuscitation and route care, forward surgical and intensive critical care, neurotrauma and TBI, which is traumatic brain injury and traumatic tissue injury. Next slide. We also have congressional special interests. And the takeaway from this slide is basically this. Restoral funding has been consistent for us in the last couple of years. From year to year, if we're offered restoral funds, which are last minute funds that are available so that we can fund projects, we use our unfunded request proposals, basically the ones that we have in-house that have not been funded yet. These are shovel-ready white papers, proposals, budgets, things of that sort. And we have these in hand so that when they say, hey, in a week, can you please send us a list of everything you want us to try to fund? We take a look at what we have in our unfunded requests repository, and then we submit them forward so that we can try to get those funded. So the takeaway here is, yes, we do receive and we do accept a lot of research proposals. We do want them. We do want to talk to you about them, and we would like for you to consider it so that we can submit your proposals and then potentially receive restoral funds if they come available. Next slide. Okay, so these are just those listservs that I was talking about. We've listed a few of them here for you so that you can take a look. Next slide. Here is the Cdmrp programs and example investments. These tend to change, but it is important for you to take a look at them. They are very comprehensive, and they have a lot of different monies assigned to them, and those tend to change depending on the needs. Next slide. So what is Prmrp? Prmrp is peer-reviewed medical research program, and it supports research in congressionally specific topic areas that address a wide range of fields, including autoimmune disease and immunology, cardiovascular health, etc. And so Cdmrp areas are also identified annually. They're identified annually by Congress, and they vary year to year. Since its inception in 1999, the program has supported over 1,000 research awards in more than 150 congressionally directed topic areas. The Cdmrp is committed to funding basic, translational, and clinical research of high merit, and their direct military relevance is important, and how it benefits our military service members, veterans, the family members, and of course, the general public. Next slide. Here you're going to see, I went ahead and provided the website to the webinars. Cdmrp has an amazing series of webinars, and they're highly recommended because you'll find detailed information, and they'll walk you through how to apply for these various funding opportunities. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk about regulatory requirements, and this is kind of near and dear to my heart, only because I am a human subject protection official, and a lot of people don't understand the complications related to regulatory requirements and how the DoD handles regulatory requirements. Sometimes this is probably the hardest part and the most confusing part of once you get the funding, why does it take so long? It's not just the money getting released, but also all the requirements that come from it. So next slide. Okay. So what do we follow? The Department of Defense Instruction 3216.02 applies to the activities conducted or supported by the DoD, such as R&D, testing and evaluation that involves humans, human data, human biospecimens, or activities that are regulated by the FDA. The instructions within the DoD, that's what we call it, apply to external collaborators. And like I said, this is usually the area of confusion. Next slide. Besides understanding our requirements, it's important to understand how to navigate the access and approval requirements you agree to follow when you accept DoD funds for research. These are the key areas of understanding that my colleagues will follow up on when you get funding. So clearly define your role. We need to know exactly what it is that you're going to do and what we are going to do. So we do what's called a statement of work. And we have our key collaborators that should be not just research partners, but also publication co-authors. We plan for the institutional review board, whether it's IRB, Institutional Review Board, or IACUC, which is for animal studies. We create this contingency plan if the PI is military, because oftentimes our PIs, they move around a lot. They may be here 2-3 years and then get what's called PCS or sent to a different location to support military needs. And so we usually have to have an idea of, well, how long is this investigator going to be around? And then, of course, have a contingency plan on who's going to take over that research so that you're not left hanging, basically. Then, of course, we have the second level review, which is HARPO or ACURO. HARPO, which is Human Research Protection Office, or ACURO, which is for animal research. It takes time, and all these documents requested should be submitted to ensure a prompt approval. Basically, you will not receive your funding until your HARPO or your ACURO is completed and approved. We also need to know what legal instruments are required. What agreements do we need? If we're going to be sharing information, then we definitely need to talk about a data sharing agreement. And then, of course, we need to know what the timelines are. How much time do we have with this money? And what do we need to do to ensure that all these research proposals get approved quickly? Next slide. So here's just a basic schematic to help you understand how it moves and what process it moves in. If you have research involving animal studies, then you need to, and you get IACUC approval from an external IACUC, then you will need to have ACURO approval. If it's approved by a military institution, then that's a little bit different, and we can discuss those details at length if you become one of our collaborators. For human research studies, if you approve it at your academic setting or at your a more public or commercial IRB, then we would still need to send it up to HARPO, and I am actually one of the designated HARPO officials here. And so we look at it, we look at the contract, we look at the statement of work, we look at making sure that all of the DoD regulations are completed. But you can't do any of this until you have your ECN, which is your external certificate authority. And so what is that? I've put a link on here for you, and this can take up to 4 to 6 weeks. All of our documents go through a system called EIRB, or the electronic IRB system. This is for human studies. For IACUC studies, there's a different process, and we can talk about that separately. But for human studies in particular, this is important because you have to have your ECA in order to access our EIRB system. And all of those documents have to get submitted through the EIRB system, your IRB approval, your proposal, your informed consents, all of those things in order for it to get sent to someone like me for review. Next slide. Okay. So DoD supported is broadly defined. It is funding facilities, equipment, analyses, access to DoD personnel for recruitment, human specimens, et cetera. And so a lot of people often say, well, what does that mean? Why does HARPO have to get involved? Anytime that we are funding anything, or either supporting it because you're doing it at your facility, or we are collaborating with you and we are sharing those costs through a collaboration, a HARPO needs to be involved. You need to prepare your protocol for IRB review. I usually tell my collaborators, if you've submitted a proposal, your very next step should be that you're working on your IRB, because you just never know when that funding is going to drop. And so you can be notified that your funding arrives tomorrow. And so your IRB should already be processed or ready to go so that you can submit it to your IRB for approval. And then, of course, when enrolling subjects from multiple locations, plan for a single IRB. A lot of times people try to get approvals from every single institution. And we have the common rule that became effective in January 2020. It was updated where it actually asks for a single IRB review. And then, of course, everyone from all the other sites would rely on that one IRB, so that not only do you keep all your documents straight, but there's only one major protocol. Okay, so be responsive to HARPO requests when you are asked for information. That's the big thing. Oftentimes, there's a lot of confusion. The HARPO will usually reach out to the collaborators directly to ask questions and to obtain records. Next slide. So that comes to the conclusion of our presentation. Here are all of our emails and contact information, Dr. Mallory's direct email, mine, and then of course, our civilian scientists that are in our office. So if you have any questions, we're open to answer them now. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. That's amazing information from our speakers. Just brilliant insights. Thank you so much. I'm sure questions are going to be coming in. Just to kick things off, would love to ask, I think a question that Greg and I hear all the time as we're working with bioscience companies. What should companies have ready when they come to see you? And what's the process like? What are the next steps? Do you have just some responses or insights on that?
So I can tell you what I would like as the director. And then a lot of times I will immediately ask Dr. Delmonico and the team to evaluate, as well as get our clinician scientists to kind of gauge interest in the product. So when you're coming to email us, what's helpful for me is a white paper. So a 1-page white paper that describes the technology or the solution that you're trying to present, what you think the application is relevant to the military. It might be different for us, but what you think it is. And then kind of what do you want? Like, what are you trying to get out of contacting us? Do you want us to evaluate it? Do you want us to test it? Do you think you want to apply for grants with us? Or do you just want general feedback? And then from there, we can give that initial feedback. What we usually do is, like I said, kind of send it over to the scientific staff for evaluation, and then we'll gauge interest. We'll get together a group of people that are interested, and we'll set up a video call, or some kind of meeting. So that way you could present a kind of a pitch deck to us, and then we can go from there. Sometimes it'll be like really clear. We want to write a grant. We saw the Cdmrp topic, and we think our technology fits this bill. Are you interested? And then we can go from there. Sometimes it's not as clear. We might direct them to an SBIR or some other mechanism, or again, maybe it's not relevant to what we're looking at, but farm it over to our other collaborators. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, most times we have a variety of different people who contact us. It's either, here is my product, it's FDA cleared, we're already ready to go, but we don't have it available for the military, and we want the military to use our product. And so we assess it to see if there's anything that we're already using that's similar. And if there isn't, then we gauge our clinicians and we talk to them about it to see if it's actually something that we can replace or improve upon, and go from there. Then, of course, we also have the ones who have prototypes, and they're still trying to figure out, does it work? Do I need to, build a crank on it, or, whatever. And so that's actually the fun stuff, because we do leverage our SBIR so that they can go ahead and get phased funding so that they can build that product until we can get to a point where we can test and evaluate it.
Great, that's really helpful. And just to point out, SBIR is what you all call it in DoD, but over at NIH, they're SBIRs, and NSF, they call them SBIRs. So it's just funny how everyone has their own nuances. That was super helpful. So we're getting some good questions as follow-ups to that. How do folks even get an audience with you to explore if there is interest in partial working together opportunities? How would they do that?
Sure. So you have our contact information. And so you could reach out to me or Dr. Delmonico. And then, and like I said, if you give us a little context, actually in preparation for this meeting, Kelvin put us in contact with MedLight and Mr. Rodney Schutz, and we were able to already talk to them on their product and set up a meeting. And we have a couple of follow-on calls, and it just started with this connection. So for combat casualty care stuff, that will probably stay within my group and to our pool of clinicians, scientists, and active duty members. But if it's not that, like, I really want to highlight that it's, even though the talk was a little bit heavy on the combat casualty care side, like if there's something with hearing loss, we can reach out to the Hearing Center of Excellence and our other partners within the ST office. So we'll get you in the right place. And so I think your first point of contact would be us. And then if it goes somewhere, then we'll be putting you in contact with our Dr. Scott Walter, who is our tech transfer, SBIR, SBIR kind of guru there. And also we can work on those agreements that Dr. Delmonico mentioned and the paperwork that goes with that.
I think one of the things to consider also is that we have a public website. And so if you Google 59th Medical Wing ST office or Science and Technology office, you'll find us, and you'll find that we have an org box. So if for some reason you've emailed us, which we're pretty responsive, I think
so.
Yeah. If for some reason we're on leave, which doesn't usually happen very often.
We work a lot.
We do. But you can always also reach out to the org box, and they will make sure that it gets to the right folks as well. It also explains a lot of what our office does and our specialties. And so that's a really good place to also look.
Awesome. I have to say that you both are very, very approachable. Greg and I will often just call and say, look, we've got 5 or so different innovations. We just want to get your sense. Are you interested? Do you think this is fit or not? Who should we talk to? Every single time these folks take our call, every single time they're eager to hear about what is going on in innovation that could help warfighters. That's their number one priority. So don't be shy, I think is the takeaway there. So we've got another good question. Is there a commonly used IRB office for military studies, or do we identify the IRB used by the institution where the study will be conducted? How does that work?
Really depends. And I hate to say that because a lot of people say, well, that doesn't really answer the question. If we're using a university, for example, and they are the primary developer of whatever it is, they typically use their IRB. And then we are just a site so that we can perform some of the work for them. And so they would approve it through that avenue and then send us all of those documents so that we can work it through our system. Now, if the DoD is the primary site, then and the principal investigator is one of our clinicians, then we encourage that they actually use a DoD IRB. And then, of course, there is no HARPO because the DoD is actually managing. Now, there's a lot of agreements that go into that with having external entities rely on a DoD IRB because it is a little bit more complex. And we have rules that don't always apply to other sites.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I thought that was very helpful. Now, if the product is not of interest to your branch, are there other branches you would refer folks to? Is there a gateway office for all military branches? I get that question all the time. Isn't there just one place you can go? And the answer is
no.
Yeah.
I wish it was that simple. If there was a clearinghouse so that they could just farm it out to where it needs to go. And we do try our best to connect those individuals. I think I mentioned that earlier, is that if there is a way that we can leverage other DoD labs who are doing that type of research, we usually send it over and let them know that, hey, you might want to talk to these individuals.
Yeah, one of the things that we get critiqued on is this avoiding unnecessary duplication. And so we, there's many DoD labs, right? We're just one of them. Institute of Surgical Research is another one, AFRI up in DC. USU, Uniform Services University, they have a whole, it's a university, so they have entire departments looking at infectious disease and things like that. Aberdeen Proving Ground, there's a whole research entity over there. And so we are familiar with a lot of them. I mean, I don't want to say all of them because there's always some random lab, that's
Pops up.
like, oh, really? Where did that one come from? But
Yeah.
like Madigan up in, Pacific Northwest is,
San Diego.
San Diego. They all have little niche research labs. AFRL, Air Force Research Lab, is based out of Dayton, Ohio at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We have connections at all of those places. So if it's more, let's say, certain operationally relevant, so it's like, we're kind of this, we think this would be a Navy application. We have contacts with the Navy lab, Naval Research Lab, NAMR San Antonio. There's like seven,
Pensacola.
yeah, and there's 7 Navy research labs that we would hopefully reach out to our counterparts there and at least try to make that introduction. Whether or not they pick it up and take it, I can't guarantee, but at least we can try and get them in the right direction.
Right.
If it's not necessarily applicable to what we're doing down here.
They go through their own process of evaluation and
Mhm.
review of things that they may be working on.
Yeah.
And so they, they would actually pick up those products that they feel are relevant to their research needs.
Great. Okay.
I think, I was going to say too, one of the funding lines, and I think you mentioned it, but the broad agency announcements are open. They're open year round. And so the Air Force has a specific one called Prmrp, which I cannot remember what it stands for, but ARMR. That's their open broad agency announcement. And so that's a good one to look at. And then MRDC, which is the Army's version of the broad agency announcement. And then SOCOM, which is special operations. They all have open announcements. And so there's that. And then MTech, which is a kind of a DoD will feed money into MTech for specific topic solution sets. And while we can't necessarily get MTech money, like if a company wins MTech and they want us to test as part of their, like they want to test something in our animal lab or something like that, that's a different kind of avenue, which we could work out later. But those are all, I think, interesting aspects because those are other labs that have research components, whereas AFRL or Air Force Research Lab really focuses on human performance. But that's something that we can at least try to connect the audience to the right place and hopefully get them out of like a rut of, no, I don't know where to go next.
A lot of those are open announcements. And so you would just submit and they would acknowledge receipt of your proposal. But, they may or may not let you know when that award may come. It just depends on when those funds become available.
Mm-hmm. And then the Cdmrps, though, are solicited announcements. Those are on a cyclic thing. They're going to be starting to spew those out by like
Any
the
minute
week.
now.
Yeah, because it's the new year. And so those are the ones to prepare. And then the feedback, whatever you get, if you get asked for a full proposal, you're going to get constructive feedback if you don't get funded. And I've seen a lot where if you take that feedback and incorporate it the best you can, you turn around and get funded the next cycle. So don't don't give up. It's free criticism. That's how I take it as an investigator.
Yeah, makes your product better, makes your proposal better, and makes it more clear. Sometimes you may be trying to convey something and it just may not come across that way. And so that criticism, that information that they provide back is not saying no, they're saying, this is how you can fix it so that we can say maybe yes.
Along those lines, working with many companies over the years, going after Cdmrp program opportunities, there does seem to be a preference for academia over business within Cdmrp. And I've had conversations with folks running Cdmrp about this. Do you have any comments on that? Is the advice to just team up with the university because that is how the reviewers are reviewing, or any insights on that?
A better approach would be team up with the DoD lab. So if your company doesn't have a DoD end user or a DoD lab that is going to do maybe it can be the smallest of small components, that will help your application a lot because a lot of us sit on some of the panels for the review. And so when we see, okay, well, this person's hooked up with that lab, we know that lab is an expert in X, Y, and Z. That I think is something that we look at when we're looking at the performers. So having not necessarily a university, if you're going to go for a university partner, check out an investigator that's been a recipient of DoD funding before, because then it'll kind of demonstrate their familiarity, but that they have probably worked on a product that was militarily relevant.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important is collaboration is key. So if you have several collaborators working on something, then that's very interesting and unique to the reviewers, because we're looking at it as, oh, wow, okay, they've really done their homework and they've really gone after all the experts and try to bring them all to the table so that they can leverage their resources and their knowledge base. So that's actually extremely important. If you just come in and I'm a company and I want money, you know, we're going to say, okay,
So does 900
so yeah,
million
we have lots of companies who want lots of money. What are you bringing to the table and who have you talked to?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
That's really
interdisciplinary
helpful.
teams are very helpful.
Another question we get all the time is timing. How long does it take once we start these conversations with you to get a CRADA, to get a grant, to get funded? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes.
Prepare, to be quite frank and honest, the agreements take a while. They go through various legal reviews within the military legal system, but your companies, and they get snagged up a lot of times on the IP. That's where it gets stuck, because the government isn't really going to budge on that language. And so what'll happen, because we have like a boilerplate CRADA agreement, and sometimes people will try to manipulate some language, and then it goes back and forth and it'll stall out for some time. And so I think it's being very cognizant of understanding the IP type of like language that needs to go in, and then being like willing to, you know, I guess not compromise, but specifically outline what the expectation is. So that's a big thing. And I would say like our CRADA process for material transfer agreements, like if you just want to give us something to test, those go faster. Non-disclosure agreements go pretty fast. The CRADAs can take, I'd say realistically, again, don't get discouraged, but like maybe anywhere between 4 months to like 9.
The average has been about 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's just the attorneys talking. You know, they have a lot of discussion back and forth. I think one of the takeaways here is the DoD is not in the business of taking your IP. A lot of companies think that we are here and that our language is wanting to take their IP. We don't have any use for it. We just want to use your product. And so that language that is in there is basically just protecting us so that we're not involved in the development of, and then there's all these patent problems later. And so I think that's something that has to be thought of, you know, very early on. If I'm going to work with the DoD, I have to know that they respect the fact that this is my product and they don't want it. They don't want to own it. They just want to use it.
For the grants, so I think SBIR or CBIR is usually the cycles. Once you submit and apply, like say for a phase 2, I think you would get notified within 6 months. We've been going through this new terminology where you're selected but not funded, which is a little bit discouraging because you made the cut, but you didn't make the cut line. But that's okay. I mean, if they find like additional money or something happens with an existing award, then you're in the line for that or the queue for that. For Cdmrp, I would say that's probably an 8 to 12 month process to get it all done, because the call itself will come out, let's say March, then you get invited for a full, that's not due till, you know, June. Then it gets out for scientific review. That takes, you know, three months to get the responses back. Then the programmatic committee meets in like November, and then the funding decision's made in December. Then they'll be reaching out to you for, you know, the negotiations phase of your contract or your grant. and then you finally get the money a year later. And now I'm not even like, that's pretty standard. And then what we're saying is that's for typical Cdmrp or Joint Program Committee 6, or JPC kind of submission. Now for the Restoral, if we end up like you present to us some device or technology and we're like, yeah, let's work on a white paper together and a grant or some kind of grant project, we'll keep that white paper. And then if Restoral comes up, we'll slam that into our list, and it's a prioritized list. And so for like the last cycle, we submitted 80 projects or something, and we got 30 funded. And so it's not like that every time. It really depends on Congress and how much they're putting toward that. But our office has a pretty good success rate on that, and hopefully that will maintain. But again, it really takes the proposals and you guys giving us the proposals, and then us matching you with the end user that really wants that device or therapy or whatever gadget, widget. So that's kind of how that works, I think, with those different levels of funding.
That's so helpful. We are at our time. You two are just amazing. Thank you so much for this. I'd love to pass it over to Kelvin.
Yep, great. Thank you.
We really appreciate this panel and the passion that you have for the work that you do. That's pretty evident. And so we are thrilled to be able to have this connection for our companies, and certainly look forward to finding other pathways for companies besides MedLight. There will be others, I'm sure, that are interested in having discussions with you.
We're welcome.
This will wrap up our track and brings to close the 2021 Renalytix BioHive Summit. Especially grateful for our generous title sponsor, Renalytix, and our track sponsor, Stoll Reeves. In fact, we appreciate all of our sponsors who are listed in the program. I encourage you to take a minute to utilize your Whova app to visit our virtual exhibit booths and to network with other attendees. By bringing our BioHive community together, we hope we've been able to foster a vibrant exchange of ideas, showcase the innovators in our state, and help you gain insights from some of the best in the business. And if you're not a member of BioUtah yet, please consider joining and help us make our ecosystem that much stronger. Again, thank you for being here. This concludes our program.